democracy is essential to global security. Sarah Chayes, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace.
When the Berlin Wall fell, I was in the outskirts of Boston. I can only compare the feeling to the earthquake premonition that some animals have, the sense that the plate tectonics of our era were on the move.
So I'm going to talk about corruption, but I'd like to step back for a minute and first talk about this. Money. Of course, I know it's always been a problem, right? We all know it. We've all read the Bible, the root of all evil, right? But I do think we're living in a period at this moment for the last couple of decades in which money has come to eclipse other values as a measuring rod for assessing our social worth and value. Now, a point about this is that it's infinite. It means if you make $10 million, well, of course, I need to make 11. You make 12, I need to make 13. There's no end to this. And so what's been happening is that elites, in order to compete in this competition for zeros, right, in bank accounts, that's what it is. It's zeros in bank accounts. They're doing two things. One, they're rewriting rules, and they are selectively enforcing those rules to benefit themselves. When I'm talking about corruption, that's what I'm talking about, right? I'm not talking about, customs agent over there who says, would you mind? And letting me take my cargo across the border. I'm not talking about some politician who has his wife, right, paid out of EU funds, one or even a lot of those. What I'm really talking about is better understood, I think, as an operating system that is governing the function of quite sophisticated networks. I first learned about this in Afghanistan. I went there as a radio reporter to cover the fall of the Taliban. I stayed to try to do something useful, right? Like rebuild a village that had been destroyed in the American bombing. Now, this village, it's, take a look at any picture of Afghanistan, right? There's a lot of dirt and a lot of rocks, and these are mud brick villages. But you do need some rocks for mud brick villages. You need to build foundations. So I went to try to buy some stone for the foundations for these houses. And I found out I couldn't have any stone. Why? Because the governor had awarded himself a monopoly on stone. And I went to the governor, and he said, why don't you build the foundations out of cement? It's much cheaper. Guess who owned the cement factory? The governor. So what he was doing was using his public office to inflate his profits as a private industrial. I also noticed one of the biggest drug traffickers in the region, this is an opium region, right, having lunch with the governor. So there you had the governor cornering the market on the two biggest revenue streams in southern Afghanistan in 2002, that's reconstruction and opium. He was, in other words, a node in what I came to understand was a horizontally integrated kleptocratic network. Turns out it's not just Afghanistan. At the time, I thought this is Afghanistan, right? It's Afghanistan. This must be particular right after a war and everything like that. It must be particular to Afghanistan. No. As I've been researching over the last 10 years, there are something like, I would say, 60 to 70 countries that are operated this way, including, in this case, Honduras. Now, this is a pretty schematic diagram, but what I'm trying to imply here is that you have a network that interweaves the public sector, the private sector, that's blue and green in this diagram, and the criminal sector, which is red. On the outside, you also have, enablers from the outside world, right? Banks and law firms and Mossack and Fonseca and real estate agents, right? These networks can look different in different countries. In some places, they're quite consolidated, right? You might have a complete overlap. For example, in Azerbaijan, the ruling family owns 11 banks. The ruling family owns the entire financial services industry, essentially, for the country. In the case of Honduras, it's a little bit less overlapped, and the relationships among these two strands, public and private, and in fact criminal sector, is much more with some exchange of personnel, but it's really an exchange of goods and services. So I make a law benefiting an energy, a certain type of energy generation, and in return I get shares of the stock in those companies. Now, another thing I learned in Afghanistan is that these networks are not just horizontally integrated, they're also vertically integrated. And by that, what I mean is, the cop, right, the police officer who pulls me aside and says, your left windshield wiper isn't working, so I could use some money. Well, he doesn't put all of that money in his own pocket. He sends part of it up the line, up to his precinct captain, who owes some of it up to his, provincial chief of police or whatever. These are vertically integrated. In return, what goes downwards is impunity. So that, for example, we found a relatively unimportant police official. We tried to start an anti-corruption case against him. President Karzai got involved because that's what's owed downwards in return for the money going upwards. The very first thing I learned about this in Afghanistan is that the victims of rigged systems like this are angry. When a police officer does shake you down, does say your left windshield wiper isn't working, he doesn't say, Sarah, I've got 4 kids at home and I have my salary's really poor. Would you mind just helping me out? My youngest child needs some shoes. If he did that, I'd probably give him some money. Most Afghans would. They understand that he's poorly paid, but that's not how he does it. He does it contemptuously and imperiously. In one case, a prosecutor in northern Nigeria was telling me, you've been talking about money all this time. It's not just money. He told me about the woman whose husband was in preventive detention. He's diabetic. She's begging the judge, please let me take him home. I will return him in time for his trial. The judge took advantage of her. As a woman, I was absolutely horrified. It's called sextortion. As a security professional, I start thinking about her brother. What does he want to do? He wants to shoot the judge. What does my cooperative member in Afghanistan want to do to the police officer who robs not his money but his dignity? He wants to shoot the police officer. Who's right around the corner in Kandahar, Afghanistan? The Taliban. Who's right around the corner in Maiduguri, Nigeria? Boko Haram. Boko Haram says, here's a gun, kill the cop. Here's a bomb, kill the judge. And oh, by the way, here's an argument. The reason that police officer or that judge is so corrupt is because he doesn't believe in God. If only we can organize our government according to God's law, they can never be so corrupt. Now, of course, the people who went that way, I've talked to the residents of Maiduguri. They regretted having believed this argument on the part of, that Boko Haram was making. But you are a furious 23-year-old Nigerian man whose sister has just been raped by a judge. You're not doing comparative political analysis, right? It's a pretty persuasive argument. So these are some of the dangers When people are victimized by rigged systems, they join insurgent groups. That's where I got into this whole issue, was watching my neighbors join the Taliban because of this. But they've also joined revolutions all across the Arab world, in Ukraine. They've also voted for, we like to call them populists. Sometimes they've actually been clowns. Sometimes they've been figuratively clowns, right? Those are dangers. But I actually think right now we're seeing an even deeper danger. And that danger is that this type of governance is beginning to infect our own systems in the so-called developed and democratic world. So let me give you a couple examples that are familiar here. Schroeder, anyone? Tony Blair, anyone? President Trump, does he own or operate a luxury real estate, high-end real estate business? Let's see, the Secretary of State of the United States, is there any overlap with a major private industry in that particular appointment? We have a Commerce Secretary who not only ran a bank that, in a place well known for laundering certain types of money, but he also owns a shipping business that transports energy around the world. We have an opioid crisis, as you've heard a few minutes ago in the United States. Recently, we found out that the Drug Enforcement Agency was doing some good preventive efforts to keep major drug companies from shipping millions of pills of opioid painkillers to small pharmacies in villages that had, 1,500 or 2,000 people in them. There was the ability to actually stop those shipments at the source if you could prove that they had been made in a illicit fashion or ignoring the regulations. Well, wouldn't you know, the drug companies started paying for the campaign financing of members of Congress and got the law weakened. And then the other thing that happened was that prosecutors from the Drug Enforcement Agency were hired by the drug companies. They brought the strategy to the drug companies. Now you could no longer prevent those shipments. So you have even there, public sector, private sector, criminal sector. How do we break this wall or this network down? One problem is networks are extremely resilient. All around the world, populations have been rising up against this, right? Brazil, there are some Brazilians in the room, Guatemala, South Korea, South Africa, the Arab Spring, Ukraine. But too often, people are focused just on the individual at the top, right? Oh, let's just remove President Mubarak and things will be better. Let's bring down Ben Ali, things will be better. Turns out a network is a very resilient structure. So if we believe in democracy, that means if we believe in government by and for the people, government in the public interest, not the interest of a tightly knit kleptocratic network, horizontally and vertically integrated, that is really bent on adding zeros to its bank account. The first thing we need to do is fight for it. And here we are in Berlin, where people fought for their democracy. And people fought to bring down a wall. And it took courage to do that. We need to apply the same amount of courage now. Our democracies, we can't take them for granted. And that means, first, get in the fight. Be as ready to fight for government by and for the people as we are ready to fight for immigration, against immigration, for marriage for all, against marriage for all, right? Get into the fight. Social sanction. Sometimes we decide not to. I had to buy a shirt yesterday. I believe in transparency, but not in my clothing. So I went out and bought a shirt. It cost 10 euros. Did I think about who made that shirt and why does it only cost 10 euros? I did, but I see somebody about to bring me some cash to get me off of this stage. He better think twice. It's going to take more than a box of cash to get me off this stage. The banks, the law firms. Now he's taken it down to a briefcase. He thinks he'll get me. No, I want the box over there. I want that one. Demand reform, not just the head of individuals. Demand reforms like less of that stuff in there, in our politics. Right. What if I take the money and don't leave the stage? How about that? That's one way of doing it. And don't be partisan about this. Don't be partisan. It's not just the other side who's corrupt. We must be as rigorous and as tough on, oh, chocolate, that's going to work way better than money. Way better than money. Get in the fight. Thank you very much.